it's a little stupefying at times, although I have to just say one thing on this topic. It's gratifying after 10 years of the federal dialogue ignoring everything that's going on in climate and clean energy. It's gratifying to have these issues in play. And frankly, it elevates what we're doing here across the Northeast to be that much more important, because as one of those regions that's really leading in terms of new models and new policies and the advancement of clean energy and the clean economy, we're developing and proving out some of the models that I think have potential to go national and international, because all these sectors have that potential as well. So we won't turn this into a presidential debate, but everything we're doing is that much more important. Thanks for being here. I'm Peter Rothstein. I'm the president of NECEC. I just get a quick moment to be up here and say a quick word of welcome before turning it over to Jeremy and our team of state affiliates and state coordinators to bring us through this legislative roundup. I want to thank all of you for being here. For those of you who are members, thank you very much for being members. We couldn't do what we do without your support, and even more so your involvement and collaboration with us. For those of you who are sponsors, that's an even higher level of coordination and support and engagement. Thank you for sponsoring and for working closely with us. I will thank all of our partners collectively, but Jeremy will actually introduce each one who is part of our state coordinators effort. I'm going to get entertainment outside the window there. Did you arrange that?
I did, yeah. I want to make sure the view is perfect.
I don't think they registered.
And specifically, as I'm talking about our members and our sponsors, we are here at Brown Rudnick, one of our sponsors that works very closely with us, and a lot of our members we know as well. And Jed Nozel is one of the partners in the Government Law and Strategies group, very active around energy issues, utility issues, regulatory issues, drawing upon many years of experience both in the Attorney General's office and in the private sector. And wanted to ask Jed to come up and say a few words of welcome. Jed Nozel.
Thank you very much, Peter. I appreciate it. I'm Jed Nozel, a partner here at Brown Rudnick. I want to introduce my colleague, Colleen McGlynn, also from the Government Law and Strategies Group, I think as many of you know. And we're just really pleased to host this incredibly timely event with an organization that's really, I think, has been built to meet the challenges that certainly we face in New England, or excuse me, the Northeast. It's really a pleasure for me and for Brown Rudnick to host everyone today. And Peter, I want to commend you on your continuing leadership and again, sort of taking this organization and using its power and building additional coalitions. It's really become the preeminent voice in the Northeast. And I do have to commend you on your recent hire as well, and I know you'll talk about him a little bit more. But Jeremy McDiarmid, I'm a little surprised you didn't call me for a reference, because I had a few things I would have offered. I won't offer those publicly now, because that should be maybe a private conversation, but I hope maybe he's still on a probationary period.
Good job. So
Yeah,
take it away.
exactly. Just a serious note on that. I've known Jeremy for a long time, and you as an organization, and Peter, you couldn't have chosen a better advocate. Jeremy gets it. He gets it from all sides. He's been in private practice. He's been in government. He's worked as an advocate, and I can say during my time in government, Jeremy was one of the people that I trusted the most as an advocate. We didn't always have the same. We're looking at issues from a different prism, but we figured out ways to come up with really pragmatic and long-term solutions. And I can't, again, say enough about what he'll offer to this organization. So congratulations for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jed. Thank you to Brown Rudnick. Thanks to everyone, and thanks for also, I'll add to that as I'm about to turn this over to Jeremy. Jeremy McDiarmid's NECEC's Vice President of Policy and Government Relations. It's been a thrill to have him joining our organization. I've also had the pleasure of working with him for many years before he actually joined our team. At times when he was another advocate at what is now the Acadia Center, at times when he was at Mass CEC, and he was the person who we were going to get funded on our innovation programs. So a lot of interaction on that side. And then most recently, he was with one of our member companies, doing projects on the solar side, which is fabulous experience to be part of this, because policy is not just about the language. Policy is about creating the business models and the market opportunities that make sense for customers, for companies, for the public sector, and to hit the kind of strategies and goals that the states and regions are establishing for growth of clean energy. Getting policy right means we're creating the market structures that really work for all stakeholders. And I know that Jeremy gets that, and it's great having Jeremy on board. Jeremy, I'm going to turn it over to you to run the show today. Wow.
Wow. Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Peter, and thanks to everyone for coming this morning. It's great to see so many faces out here, and you're going to see that it's been a very, very busy time across the region, and we've got a star-studded cast to help walk us through it and really stimulate some conversation around what went right, what went wrong, and what's still left to do. A big thanks to Brown Running for hosting, and to Jed for his kind words, and to Paul Afonso as well for his leadership on energy issues. I did want to just take a quick moment to introduce our star-studded panel today, and these are the folks who are working tirelessly, session in and session out, to make sure that the clean energy transition is happening across the Northeast. We've got Olivia Campbell-Anderson, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Vermont, Marty Groman, Executive Director of E2 Tech in Maine.
Good morning.
Madeline Minot, Executive Director of Clean Energy New Hampshire. Dan Bosley, Government Executive and Legislative Guru at NECEC. And Mike Martone, who's a Government Relations Executive at Murtha Kalina down in Connecticut. These are our eyes and ears on the ground, and really folks who are very lucky to have here to walk us through what happened over the past legislative sessions across the region. So the way this is going to work is we're gonna have each panelist talk for 6 to 8 minutes and try to capture or recap a whole legislative session in a short period of time, and really provide the highlights and the lowlights before opening it up to a conversation. And that conversation is going to be partly among the panelists and partly with you. So want to make sure that you all have questions ready to go, and we have a good amount of time to interact and really profit from all being in the same room. This chart, busy and colorful as it is, provides just a sort of a quick snapshot of the region's efforts this session. And you'll notice that there are many different stories to tell, from the turnaround story in Maine to the land of vetoes in New Hampshire, some significant wins in Connecticut, some mixture of wins and losses in Vermont, and missed opportunities in Rhode Island, and an incomplete in Massachusetts. A lot of things have happened this session, and a lot of things are still yet to be done. But I think one thing to take away is we're seeing much more engagement at state legislatures across the region around clean energy issues, the development of clean energy markets, and I think that's a good thing for our industry. It's a good thing for the Northeast in terms of attracting and creating market opportunities for NECEC members and beyond. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Olivia to walk us through Vermont. Thank you.
Well, actually, I'm going to let you look at that for a minute more. I know it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Good morning from the Green Mountain State. We're not quite living up to our reputation and logo, but we're still trying in terms of continued progress on renewable electricity, heating and transportation to meet our climate commitments. So overall, a color of the session in Vermont is that we have a Republican governor that has entered his second term this year. So he has more experience in the governor's role and working with legislature. However, 40% of our members in the House, in the legislature, were new. And every single committee has new chairmanship and leadership in the Vermont House. So there was a a big learning curve despite the, you know, the rank and swells in terms of number of candidates on this, in the legislature that actually ran and got elected, with climate action being a primary component of their campaign. So there's a lot of, we ended the session with a lot of frustration amongst those freshman members. We saw the climate caucus of the legislature swell, but it was difficult to turn that interest, having just so many people being in their first year of serving in the legislature. So it was a lot of organization time in the House, a lot of learning and briefing time in the House. The Senate did not have, Senate pretty much maintained the same as it has been, so it didn't have those challenges. We all, of course, thought that 2019 would be the year that everyone comes together on climate. It's actually one of my favorite, I don't know if you've seen that meme, the protest sign. And Vermont, throughout the session, there were very high expectations because we had numerous times where the students were striking, and in the cafeteria, there was a lot of protests where literally there were hundreds of people throughout the State House, you know, where you couldn't walk through, and that created a lot of stress for the Sergeant of Arms managing the building. But I do want to, so very high expectations, both I think on climate action by the public and by this freshman class that came in, overall, that were not really met by the leadership. Notably the House Speaker, but they, you know, sort of asking for patience, asking for giving us time. And as you'll see as I talk about highlights from the, you know, big 3 sectors that members did spend a lot of time on, there's a lot of setup for more action next year because Vermont has a 2-year biennium. So every bill that did not move still could move next year. So it's just year 1 of the 2-year biennium. So exciting news for the renewable electricity space. We had the first expansion on net metering that we've had in 4 years, and I think we're all very familiar with the net metering battles. So we're glad to see that we started with a much larger request. There were actually a half dozen or more bills put in to expand net metering by legislators, most of them on their own accord. So there's a lot of high interest, and we know it's a program that works well, and enabling towns, schools to have more access and not be capped out is a good thing. So for schools and any education institutions, they now can access up to 1 megawatt of net metering within their utility jurisdiction. We also made some changes to make virtual net metering and grouping work a little bit better. There was some arcane language that sort of required every school to be in the same net meter group with all of the town buildings, and given the amount of energy that they need, that it doesn't really work. So some new opportunity for net metering are, in terms of the utility scale project, standard offer works very well, and there was some language that was sunsetting, so to solidify the program, and we passed that successfully. There were some changes to the compensation formula for hydro. Do you have a question? Okay. So standard offer is the competitive procurement program in Vermont. So up to projects every year, there is a procurement projects that are 2.2 megawatts and below can apply. And it's a price base. There are also technology carve-outs with the program. So big changes though in terms of CPGs. We dealing with accountability and timeliness issues at the Public Utility Commission in processing applications. And so we had a negotiation with legislators that in exchange for some funding, to support the Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service, there's a no fee on every application, that, is pretty, minor. It's $100, for small projects and $5 per kilowatt for larger projects. And there's a timeliness requirement, so if you have a CPG, the PUC has to make a decision within 90 days of the last filing. Certificate of Public Good that's required for all generation projects in the state. And new around energy storage, there was also a lot of discussion on energy storage. From the legislature's perspective, they were more, there was an interest in regulating energy storage, rather than seeing how we can grow and enable more energy storage. Not that they don't want more of it, but so now you need to get a CPG for large storage projects, and we were able to avoid regulation for projects that were smaller than 500 kilowatts, because the administration actually wanted to have CPGs for every battery project in the state, including residential. And that's not the path that needs to go with energy storage solutions. So we saw that as a positive outcome, even though no one likes paying fees, but it's, you know, it takes away the element that solar is not paying its fair share in terms of, government operation needs, et cetera. There was a tremendous amount of time spent on Transportation Committee on Electric Vehicles this year, which is a huge shift. Our transportation committees are used to being very focused on how are we going to maintain our bridges and roads. And it was very exciting to see the Senate President put himself onto the Transportation Committee, recognizing that it's a major climate need, as 43% of Vermont's carbon pollution and climate greenhouse gases come from transportation sector. So we're gonna see a lot more in this space. We're very excited to have regulatory clarity for electric vehicle charging. And for the first time now, Vermont actually will have a state incentive, customer incentive for electric vehicles. We were one of the few states that did not have a state-supported incentive in New England. We worked really hard to try to open up the market to enable more private investment in electric vehicle charging, and reduce the risk on ratepayers, so it's not just a utility opportunity. We also then, this was the last thing I want to highlight on electric vehicles, is that the requirement for state vehicles in the state fleet to be hybrid or plug-in electric vehicles with certain percentage points. That was an initiative of the Senate Pro Tem that he wanted to make sure we're leading by example. Weatherization and energy efficiency, there was also an area where there's tremendous amount of time spent. Really started about, there was a need to update a sunsetting tax on wholesale fossil fuel that funds low-income weatherization, and a real recognition that we're not meeting our weatherization goals. And that turned into, I think, what will be the most transformative setup in the future for Vermont that I would encourage folks to expand further. You may be familiar that we have an energy efficiency utility, Efficiency Vermont, and the legislature directed to look for using those funds, which are $55 million plus a year, towards all energy efficiency, so including heating, cooling efficiency, and transportation efficiency. So they're not able to use those funds yet, but we expect that will be a big, we are expecting that to be a very big topic that propels next session. We're also next session, what's next? Looking to 100% renewable energy standard, and REV is, as well as the Global Warming Solutions Act, to have more accountability. But I look forward to talking more about what's next in our conversation and share those highlights with you.
So it sounds like, first year in a 2-year biennium, a lot of sort of good work got done, but there's a lot of incomplete sort of, or things to do.
Yeah, and there's definitely big expectations and no excuses for more legislative action next year.
Duly noted, thank you. Now we're going to turn to the great state of Rhode Island and Guru Dan Bosley.
Thank you. I only got one page.
Dan also has the charge of making setting the bar for humor today, so we're expecting a lot out of him.
Oh God, no, I got nothing. Okay, so Rhode Island, this is my house. That's the state house.
Gotta go higher than that, Dan.
There used to be a person that worked for NECEC, who's gone now, perhaps you remember him, his name is Jamie Dickerson. Jamie did a lot of the Rhode Island and a lot of the groups, a lot of the stuff that he did down there is phenomenal. So I will attempt to do Rhode Island. I will attempt to do him justice. It was a strange year in Rhode Island. There was a lot of work in cooperation with other stakeholders in the legislation. Nothing got through to the governor's desk, but we are teed up for next year. We had a successful Clean Energy Day down there early in the year. We met with dozens of legislators. We met with, on Clean Energy Day, we had a long discussion with Carol Grant from OER, the Office of Energy Resources, and also with Rosemary Powers, who works in Governor Raimondo's office. Two of the biggest things that we took a look at and were our priorities, amongst our biggest priorities were the renewable energy siting and land use bill. I'm not going to read the slide. You can read the slide yourself. It was a comprehensive bill. It took about a year and a half, and it spun off from the permitting process that had happened the last biennium. All 39 communities have one permitting process now. We wanted one siting process for the entire state. We worked with a lot of different stakeholders, but unfortunately, even though the Senate passed a trim back substitute A version, it wasn't taken up in the House. And I would add that substitute A, if you're familiar with Massachusetts, every time a bill gets amended, they put a new number on it so that you know it's an amended version and you know it's different than the version that you're looking at. Rhode Island doesn't do that. They just call them substitutes. So substitute A, substitute B, substitute. So they get the sub A, but it wasn't taken up in the House. And the same with virtual net metering. The virtual net metering bill, well, we spent considerable time on this also. We worked with a public relations firm to try to get as many editorials as we could in the papers. We worked with other groups. We met with legislators. We met with decision makers. We met with businesses, and put a lot of time and effort into this. The Senate again passed a sub-A version, but the House didn't take it up. The groups that we worked with on the solar siting collaboration, these are the different groups. It's a great network. It's great. It's a great foundation for us working together in the future. And we're pretty proud of everybody getting together and agreeing on a bill that didn't pass. And the same with virtual net metering. You can see the different groups that were involved in this. And in the middle was one of the editorials that was put into a business paper. It was very important for business. We're very disappointed it didn't pass, and hopefully it will get teed up for next year. Here are some of the other priorities that we had this year. You can see a trend. Neither bill passed out of the committee. Did not pass this session. Fortunately, a lot of work's been done, and as they come back for the second year of the biennium, hopefully some of these bills will get done. What's ahead for Rhode Island? Well, everything we didn't do this year. It's the same bills, including some of the other happenings. There are things in power sector transformation, offshore wind. Obviously, we expect that we'll hear even more from the Raimondo administration. They did the heating sector transformation, which gets out there and tackles thermal, which is very, very important as we go forward. We kind of have a handle on what we need to do with energy generation. But thermal and transportation are two areas that we need to do more work on. This is a recognition of the fact by the Raimondo administration. And then there are a couple externals that I just wanted to mention on legislation this year. First, there were changes in leadership of the Energy Committee. There was a minor speaker fight in Rhode Island, and most of the progressives, which included the energy chair, did not vote for the speaker, and so were replaced with people who did vote for the speaker. That's par for the course. So we've got to bring people, and they're good people, and we need to bring them up to speed. So that slowed the process down a little bit. And then the other thing that slowed it down was that there seems to be some tension between the administration and the legislature over several issues. So this all contributes to bills being hung up in the process and taking longer than need be. So hopefully next year we can start to do a little bit better and work on all of these things. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions. And if I have any time left, I'd like to cede that time to Massachusetts.
Understood. But first, we're going to go to New Hampshire. We'll see about that, Dan.
Thank you. So we up in New Hampshire last November saw the majorities in our House and Senate flip from Republican to Democrat, but we kept our same governor. That's a little bit of an unusual situation for New Hampshire to have Democratic majorities in the House and Senate. And we are more used to having divided government going the other way around, with Republicans in the legislature and a Democratic governor. So this is a little bit of a new climate for New Hampshire, and there was a lot of enthusiasm by the Democratic majorities in the House and Senate to introduce a lot of bills that would favor renewable energy and energy efficiency and things like that. So we tracked about 40 bills this session, plus keeping an eye on the budget. There was a broad array of topics covered by these bills, from our renewable portfolio standard, net metering, low and moderate income community solar, municipal aggregation, streetlights, energy storage, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, and building codes. So some bills made it through, some didn't, but as Jeremy sort of previewed, we are in the midst of veto-palooza in New Hampshire. Since I made this slide last week, we're actually up to 41 vetoes at this point, and there's still about 60-ish bills that are making their way to the governor. So we're expecting more vetoes to come. For those of you keeping track of bills, that the outcome is that they've been vetoed. There will be a veto override, probably 2 veto override session days scheduled in mid-September. We're hearing that's likely to be September 18th, 19th. So these bills that have been vetoed include HB 365, which would have increased the size of projects that can participate in net metering up to 5 megawatts. For those of you paying attention to last year, this is sort of a replay. We went through this last year with Senate Bill 446, which aimed to do the same thing, which was vetoed. The veto override came short by about a handful of votes. So there was really strong bipartisan support for this bill during the session. We're hoping that that means there's a good chance to have a successful veto override there. The other bills that have been vetoed so far include Senate Bill 72, which we were really hoping would make it through, which would eliminate what we call in New Hampshire rec sweeping. So we have this credit that's calculated for unregistered recs that get credited for free to everyone that has an RPS obligation. And it's really driving down demand, especially for our solar recs. The solar class 2 obligation in New Hampshire is quite low. It goes to 0.7% by 2025. So in past years, this free credit for unregistered recs has been bigger than the total obligation. So it's really made it so that it's really hard to find a buyer for a solar rec in New Hampshire, and if you can, the value is really low. So that has been vetoed, as well as Senate Bill 168, which would have increased the obligation for solar recs in our RPS from that 0.7% in 2025 would have become 5.4% in 2025. We also saw a bill that would have set a goal for the state to convert all state vehicles to zero-emission vehicles by 2039, as well as this bill that would have allowed municipalities to opt for having smart controls and associated metering on streetlights. Some bills that we're still waiting, that are still making their way to the governor or are on the governor's desk right now, include a municipal aggregation bill. Here in Massachusetts, municipal aggregation is used really widely, and in part that's because it's on an opt-out basis. If your town decides to do municipal aggregation, you you have to actively opt out. Here in New Hampshire, we have a statute that hasn't been used because it's on an opt-in only basis. So when you have to actively opt in to participate in municipal aggregation, there's really low participation rate. So we're really hoping that that's going to make it through and that that's going to become an option for municipalities in New Hampshire, especially those communities that have set ambitious renewable energy goals community-wide. We have also a replay of biomass subsidy bill. There's been a lot of drama with a bill that passed last year that would have offered 3 years of support for 6 biomass electric plants in New Hampshire. It was vetoed, the veto was overridden, and then it was brought to FERC as a violation of the Federal Power Act. So it's been tied up at FERC and in courts. There was an amendment made to another bill, which HB 183 was originally a study committee to look at microgrids. There was a massive amendment made to create baseload renewable energy credits for these biomass facilities. So that is likely to be vetoed again, and we'll find out what happens. And then House Bill 582 would increase the amount of RGGI revenue that comes to New Hampshire that goes to our energy efficiency program. I was amazed to hear Olivia say that their energy efficiency budget is $55 million, because in New Hampshire ours is about maybe half of that. So we could really use some extra funding in our energy efficiency programs. The bills that have passed include Senate Bill 24, which reauthorized our participation in RGGI. In New Hampshire, every time there's changes to the MOU between the states and RGGI, we have to have legislative approval to approve those changes and continue approving our participation. That's a positive outcome. Our governor originally campaigned on pulling New Hampshire out of RGGI, so we're glad that he came around and we at least can continue participating there. There is Senate Bill 165, which is the low moderate income community solar bill. That creates a 3-cent adder for projects that qualify as low moderate income community solar projects on top of our existing net metering credit. It also creates on-bill crediting for what we call group net metering, what most folks call virtual net metering. So the way that our group net metering worked is that the payment went to the group host, and then the group host was completely responsible for giving a discount or a payment back to the group members. This would make it so that the utilities have to do on-bill crediting for group members. We also had a bill that will create a statewide energy data platform, so all the utilities will have to work together to create one consistent platform where they have to share utility customer data. Not on this slide, but we also had an update to our building codes. On the energy efficiency front, that's really big for us, especially the Energy Conservation Code had really been holding back making progress on building codes. In New Hampshire, we were still on the 2009 code. So we have finally moved up to the 2015 code, though unfortunately with some serious amendments to the Energy Conservation Code, so we're not quite there. But that's it for New Hampshire. Stay tuned for those other bills that are still in the midst, and then the outcome of those veto override votes.
So mid-September is going to be a big moment to
Yes.
determine whether or not you guys get some
Big changes or not.
Fair enough. Thank you, Madam. All right, so now we're going to go back to Dan Bosley. I'm sorry. Yeah, we're going to reverse alphabetical order. So Massachusetts first, then Maine.
That's not usually the way.
And Maine likes to think Connecticut likes to think of itself as first, but we're flipping the script today. You do not have extra time, Dan.
All the speakers so far have been great. That guy from Rhode Island was phenomenal. Just blown away by that guy. Massachusetts. Before we get into a couple of the bills that did pass this year, and there's a lot of good news on Massachusetts this year, but I just wanted to tell you that, in every one of these states, NECEC does a lot more than just follow legislation. And when we talk about legislative roundups, we don't talk about what we do on the regulatory side, which is a whole different story. But there are other things that happen, and in Massachusetts, we had to follow. At the beginning of this year, there were 254 energy-related bills that were filed. Now, that doesn't count bills that were like a farming bill, which impacts biomass, or a housing zoning bill that tightens building codes that may have stretch codes in it. It doesn't count those, and we do watch those too. But we watch all of those bills. We did have a Clean Energy Day this year. We visited with 21 legislators, including a very long meeting with the speaker and with the leadership of the committee. Twice we met with the leadership of the committee because he called us back at the end of the day. Public forums to highlight the industry. We've had, we gave Matt Beaton, he received the Energy Award this year. We monitored hearings. This year, after a slow start, there were 12 hearings related to our bills, but they were in 8 different committees. So we follow what goes on in all of those different committees. And we filed testimony on multiple bills and assisted in shaping legislation, including meetings at the end of the day where we would sit around. And that was particularly interesting with the Greenworks bill, where we were able to go in and influence the committee to do a couple of different things that they wanted to, that ended up in the bill. So I'm going the wrong way here. So here I am. It's right in front of me too. I just can't get it right. So the 2 bills that I want to key on, the 2 first bills are the Greenworks bill. The Greenworks bill is an important bill for several different reasons. It's modeled after the MassWorks bill. The Greenworks bill is a $1.3 billion bond, $1 billion or $100 million a year for 10 years to fund clean energy, resiliency measures, energy efficiency for municipalities. There's also $100 million for municipal microgrid projects, $125 million for electrification of municipal fleets as well as charging infrastructure, $20 million to put sustainability coordinators in every community. That was one of the things that we had asked for, that we have some expertise in those communities so that we can do things in those municipalities. $50 million in low interest loans for resiliency projects, and on the floor was added $30 million for EV rebates by extending out the More EV program in Massachusetts. So we did work on trying to put the coordinators in place. We also worked to ensure that this just wasn't money that is being spent to do things that should be done by infrastructure in the course of doing business in a state. We wanted to make sure that this was competitive, it was innovative, it was something that was additional, that would actually invest in mitigation and resiliency. So, and then I should add 10% of the money that's going to be put out every year goes to cities and towns that are under 7,000 in population. So spread it out over the entire state. S10, which is the other bill, it's sort of a competitor bill that was put in by the governor. It's pretty nondescript. It says that he's raising the property transfer fee, and that money, which is about $137 million, would then go for mitigation for communities in an as yet unspecified manner. So he's just raising $137 million, but he says DOER will then spend for municipalities. The difference between the 2 bills, this is a bonding bill, so it has to be released. The government has to release the bond even if it gets passed. That bill, by the way, passed the House. It is now.
Speaker of the House calling.
Yes, I did mention it was you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. That bill is passed the House. It is now in the Senate for Senate deliberation, and we'll see what happens. They're now on, as of today, about a 6-week recess. So hopefully they'll begin to work on these things during the recess. So the Greenworks has passed. It's a bonding bill. It has to be released, so the bonds have to be released, and there's no guarantee the administration is going to release those bonds. We hope that this rises to the level where they would. The governor's bill has a transfer tax, so it has a funding source, but the House and Senate raised the property transfer tax fee in the budget. So the chances of them going back and doing that, and the chances of doing that when they need taxes for transportation and healthcare and education is slim. Our advice to them is combine the 2 bills and do them both, because $1 billion doesn't go as far as you would think that it goes. The next slide is our other bills that were part of our priorities. Senate 3667 is a reaction to a crisis. We have heard more about interconnection this year than any other single issue. It is an issue that we're working on, and this is a bill filed by Chairman Golden. And the bill filed by Chairman Golden is, even if it doesn't happen, it's a great hammer to hammer the utilities and the PUC to try to do something on this. and people are meeting, there are hearings, there are comment periods, so this is having its effect, and we hope that we can come to some agreement on that. Other than that, I want to just mention the one bill that we opposed, that was for utilities to begin to reknit themselves by getting into generation by doing solar. We opposed that bill. We also opposed that when it was filed as an amendment to Greenworks. The other bills are pretty much self-explanatory on this page. There are several bills that on this page. The solar property tax bill is a bill that has been around for years. We're trying to work something out. We got together with both the Mass Assessors Association, the Mass Municipal Association, trying to work something out on this bill so that we can finally put this to rest. At the same time that we're trying to do something that would impact the property tax, we also testified in favor of the fuel cell technology tax, which would actually put them on the same par with property tax. And even as we speak, last night about 5:30, I got an email from the TUE committee saying that they put a golden storage bill out, which would also create some property tax exemptions for storage behind the meter. So we're trying to just harmonize so that every one of those is the same way. Energy efficiency is the same that every state is going through. And then in addition to that, I just wanted to mention that, again, there are other activities that we've done. We have monthly policy calls. We have topics on interconnection lately. Those we meet on specific topics. We co-chair the ACES effort, which is the Alliance for Clean Energy Solutions. We monitor ISO activity, monitor the state budget. And this year it was important because there was a decision that was made about offshore wind. If you've been following that, the governor's amendment was adopted last night, and it looks as if the August 9th offshore wind bids are going to be able to understand exactly where they are insofar as the statutory requirements are. And then we participate in federal calls through the AE, America's Energy Economy. And with that,
You yield the rest of your time to the gentleman from Maine. Thank you, Dan. And there's so much happening in Massachusetts, and even though it's halfway through the session, I think the Greenworks passing the House is really a sign of the Speaker's engagement and recognition that there's a fair amount of work to be done on clean energy, and it's a good first step, but it's not the only thing that needs to get done. And now with that, Marty Groman.
Thank you, Dan. Good work. Yeah, Marty Groman here from E2 Tech up in Maine. I bring greetings from Dan Burgess, who is, I know, highly regarded in this audience. He's doing a great job for us, heading up the governor's energy office up in Maine. And I would note that Maine was the only state in that opening grid that Jeremy put up there that was all green. That seems to be something to do with me having left the legislature somehow. There was lots of yellow and red when I was there. But
I think it's your new role at E2 Tech that made the difference.
I think that's what it is, E2 Tech. So there's been sort of a sea change up there in Maine, as you may know, and passivity is not an option. And there's been a lot of energy around clean energy related issues. I don't want to give you a book report, but I'll hit on just a few things I picked 5 here, and there's probably 25 that I could have picked for pieces of legislation that were successful in this term. Death to net metering, or death to gross metering, excuse me. This is taking us back to the rules that existed. This is largely complete. There is a little bit of a working group going on to kind of figure out what to do with those extra meters. Gross metering was a situation where it was sort of double the meters, and there are a few extras kind of hanging around out there. But other than that, the work there is largely done. This LD 1711, though, this is a really significant piece of legislation that's going to move the needle in Maine for years to come, I think. And notably, as a person who has worked in large rooftop solar in my career, there's a pretty big procurement for commercial and industrial solar here that has a pretty aggressive structure for those types of larger rooftop distribution warehouse, shopping mall type installations, which I'm jazzed about. And so look for activity there. We do have on this LD 1430 a working group on property taxes and solar ownership that's moving ahead, and a very significant reform of our renewable portfolio standard, and lots of activity there. A Class 1A rec that's created, kind of a grand compromise between industry and clean energy advocates, I guess, if you can call that two sides. Maybe that's not fair, but lots of activity going on in Maine there, and look forward to diving deeper on that one. And then the Green New Deal, as we call this, actually kind of a larger name for a smaller piece of legislation that'll drive some solar on schools. And lots in the energy efficiency world too in Maine. We are net receivers in RGGI, so we have some dollars coming in, and that goes to energy efficiency. I'll highlight the first one, that LD 398. I'm told it corrects legislation that I put through while I was in the Maine House, so there you have it. But anyway, giving the Efficiency Maine Trust more flexibility around putting together energy efficiency work. I think such an opportunity is industrial efficiency, helping factories up in Maine look at their HVAC systems, look at, soft starts on their drives, and all of that low-hanging fruit that's out there that sometimes gets neglected. A little bit of an efficiency first model. I'd like to see that happen. This energy, the electric vehicle rebate, I'm hearing a lot of energy about transportation, right? That's happening in Maine as well. There is a working group, and you can see updates to that on Efficiency Maine's website right now. If you're interested in that, your timing is perfect. That rebate should be finalized here in the next few weeks, but there's opportunities to weigh in on that, as I know several of you in this room already have. So I think in general, getting Efficiency Maine involved more in quote-unquote beneficial electrification is a big push of the Maine legislature right now. And I'll just call out a final thing on the last one you see there, this heat pump goal. That just is a goal, right? There aren't per se teeth to that. There won't be consequences if that goal is not hit, but it's something that's memorialized in statute. And I think there's a program design element to this that really interests me, which is that if you are a homeowner, I raise money for a fuel fund around the little town where I live called Biddeford every year, and it goes to people who can't fill their oil furnace. A lot of times these heat pump program designs don't reach people like that, but there is, because they can't come up with a $6,000 check, a $500 rebate doesn't help them. I'm hearing a move for a program design that will help low-income homeowners and renters get involved with this heat pump work, and I think that's positive. Studies. If you perform study work, now's the time to reach the Maine PUC. There's lots of opportunities. As I know many of you know who've worked around state legislatures, oftentimes converting your bill to a study is a nice pat on the head, thank you, nice try. I may have had that happen to me a couple of times. But some of these will lead to work that I think will have a long-term lasting influence. The bottom one there is probably the one with the greatest political implications. This is the concept of converting Maine's investor-owned utility, Central Maine Power of on-grid, to consumer ownership, and that's controversial. And there's a lot at play with that study in particular. Jeremy asked us to sort of highlight what the kind of failures were, and there were some. I would pull out this as I just grabbed this Facebook post to kind of catch a narrative that I did hear around the State House. It's not all roses. We did not win over the hearts and minds of everybody on the clean energy front, as you can see. a Republican legislator who's a person that I know and respect and actually works in the field, posting here that, you know, this is the Democrats are in the bag for solar type thing. So I'm always looking for that intersection between the economy and the environment. And if the two circles of that Venn diagram cross over, you know, we just saw New Balance with Maine factories commit to 100% renewable energy, for example. I think that's a good business move for New Balance. This Republican legislator probably arguing the opposite way. So I think that's a shame, and so we have more work to do. And you know, if watching Twitter at all, I mean, obviously this is a reality check. I know basically everyone in the room and online knows this, but really, renewable energy makes up a pretty small percentage of our portfolio on any given day. And this is the director of the Office of Innovation up in Maine, Hannah Pingree, does a great job just continuing to push that. And I think her influence together with Governor Mills is going to push more in the second session of the Maine legislature, which is our short session. It only runs from January to March. So a couple of things, I would love it in closing if you would pull out your phone and your calendar. On Wednesday, September 25th, we will hold a legislative wrap-up for Energy Matters up in Portland around the same time of day, from 8 to 10 in the morning. And we're going to have some prominent speakers and legislators do a real deep dive on this stuff. As the guy whose job it is to sell out the room, I would really welcome all of you. Portland is an easy run from here. We've got parking right in the building where we are at the University of Southern Maine, where if you've been to EG Tech events, where we do a lot of our events. And that's about it. I guess we're celebrating 200 years of independence from Massachusetts. And
but we know where you live.
Come up and join us on September 25th, and I look forward to your questions and further discussion.
Great, thank you, Marty. And I think, you know, banner year for Maine, but a lot of work to be done, both sort of, as you say, on hearts and minds, but also a lot of follow-on work to execute and deliver on the promises of all these big bills that went through. So that now the confetti's on the floor,
Yep.
the PUC and the stakeholders need to get to work, and I think, you know, it's open for clean energy business in Maine right now, and I think that's a huge opportunity for a number of them.
I think Peter said that really well in the intro. We got the words on the page. Now we need to deliver and make it real for our businesses. I agree completely.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're going to turn to Connecticut, where there were some significant commitments to offshore wind and changes on a number of fronts. So Mike Martone, walk us through.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. I'm trying to wrap up what's been a very, very interesting morning thus far with a couple of things that have happened in Connecticut. Our legislative session ended on June 5th, and there were two pieces of major energy legislation passed. The first was House Bill 5002, which started out as the Green New Deal. Sorry about that. So House Bill 5002 started out as the Green New Deal and sort of morphed into the Omnibus Renewable Energy Bill. And I'll just go over the highlights of it. It expanded the virtual net metering cap from $10 million worth of credits to $20 million. It extended the LREC-ZREC for 2 years. It called for a study of solar on highways. The DOT and DEEP have to do a study to determine if there are areas where solar could be used near state roads. And I think that this came as a result of Energy Co-Chair Norm Needleman's trips up and down the Mass Pike, seeing what Amoresco has done there. The most controversial piece of the bill allows the EDCs to own energy storage, and the generation community was absolutely off the charts when they saw this. It came out at the very last minute. It was new. Typically in Connecticut, you have public hearings. prior to bills moving forward. This issue did not have a public hearing. It appeared in what's called the strike law amendment that came with the bill. And you know, the generators felt that this is kind of allowing the EDCs to get back in the generation business. The legislature in DEEP saw it a different way. They felt that this was allowing for resiliency, and there was no intent to give the EDCs open field running. But the fact of the matter is the section reads, nothing in this section shall be interpreted to prohibit or limit the ability of an EDC from building, owning, or operating an energy storage system. So it remains to be seen where this is going to go, but this was really the most controversial piece of this bill. So what I think is the most important piece of the bill calls for a study of the value of distributed energy. And this is going to be done in PURA docket 19-06-09, and it's really going to set the stage for renewable energy as we move forward. Now, there's a very short time frame. The PURA is required to get back to the Energy and Technology Committee by July 1st of 2020. And there hasn't been any activity yet other than a whole host of people, including NECEC, signing up to be participants. And you know, I can't stress enough that if you do business in Connecticut, this is the roadmap, and this is what's going to determine where we go from here. So, and you know, the utilities will positively be involved very heavily in this. So I can't stress enough that you need to involve yourself if you want to do business going forward in Connecticut. Just two last things on this. It increased the RCIP, the Green Banks Renewable, the residential solar program by 50 megawatts, which essentially adds a year to that program, and it extends the controversial net metering rules for an additional 2 years. The other big piece of renewable energy legislation was House Bill 7156, which authorized the procurement of 2,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030, and requires that DEEP go out for a solicitation of a minimum of 400 megawatts in 2019. There was a lot of debate during the legislative session between the legislature and DEEP. DEEP wanted to take a more cautious stand and give them the ability to go out for 1,000 megawatts by 2030, not a requirement. And the legislature pushed back and ultimately won the battle, and the requirement now is 2,000 by the year 2000. DEEP has to solicit at least 2,000 by the year 2030 and 400 megawatts this year. And it's a fast track. The legislature is very hot on this. This was an exciting thing that the committee really got behind. There's an RFP that's coming out August 15th. The bids are due September 30th, and the decision will be up in sometime in November. So we're taking great strides with offshore wind in Connecticut. So the state budget also had a couple of things you might be interested in. They increased the electric vehicle rebate by $3 million and established a state fleet emission reduction. The goal is to have electric vehicles, 50% electric vehicles by 2030 and 30% trucks by 2030. It also added 2 additional commissioners to the Public Utility Regulatory Authority. You may recall the old DPUC had 5 commissioners back in 2011 when PURA was created under DEEP. They dropped it to 3. It's now back to 5. The rumor around the Capitol is one of the new commissioners is going to be former Democrat State Party Chairman Nick Folletto, and no real word on who the other person is going to be. So let me just take a quick look here at what didn't pass. The Green Bank had a bill that would have expanded their authority beyond energy to include investments in climate change, water reclamation, waste recycling, and land conservation would have been eligible investments for them. And it passed the Senate, but it became kind of a lightning rod in the House, so it never went anywhere. It passed the Senate very easily. The other thing I want to talk to you about is a bill, House Bill 5030, which would have prevented the sweeps of $54 million from the energy efficiency fund. When the biennial budget passed 2 years ago, it was a very controversial piece that basically raided the energy efficiency fund. There was a lot of effort to stop the raid this year. That did not happen. But I think if there's any silver lining in it, it was that the governor committed not to raid the fund during his tenure going forward. So again, I'll close with that and urge you once again, please get involved with the PURA docket. It's going to be very, very critical for energy going forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So before we turn it over to the conversation portion, I wanted to take a moment to recognize what had happened in New York this session, and the historic Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was signed by Governor Andrew Cuomo with much pomp and circumstance a couple weeks ago, sitting next to former Vice President Al Gore. You know, this bill codifies into statute a number of Governor Cuomo's clean energy goals, but it also incorporates a lot of environmental justice commitments that have often not been as prominent in clean energy legislation, and is becoming increasingly something that we need to think about and be sensitive to and incorporate into what we're doing. One question I have for the panel, and I'm going to tee this up now so you guys can start thinking about it, is, you know, how this legislation affects the policy environment in the neighboring states. Does this something that's we're gonna see competition evolve? Are we gonna see folks trying to follow in New York's footsteps, or is it sort of something that somebody else is doing and we're gonna be aware of it but not pay that close of attention? But some of these goals are really sort of very, very aggressive and ambitious in trying to set a clean energy agenda for the next 40 years. So we're seeing, you know, 100% clean energy by 2040, 70% of which must be renewable by 2030, 9 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035, 6 gigawatts of distributed solar by 2025, which is not that far away. 3,000 megawatts of energy storage by 2030, and a climate council to help get it all done. And you know, this is a very ambitious plan, and you know, again, it's the words on the page set a trajectory, but there's a lot of work to be done to actually get the projects in the ground, get the sort of electrons interconnected, and create those markets in which companies are going to be able to thrive and help with this clean energy transition. Very exciting, but still an unfinished sort of story that requires a lot of follow through from a number of parties, both inside government and the private sector, and among communities in New York. So just wanted to flag that for folks, and I do want to turn it over to our panelists with that question. You know, does New York move the needle for you guys in your states? So we've got 3 microphones. There's going to have to be a little sharing. I think the Rhode Island and Massachusetts panelist is going to have to share a mic. But I want to turn it over to you guys and hear your thoughts around New York, and then we'll take it from there. So thank you guys for the sort of overviews, and now it's the time to engage the audience and engage yourselves in a discussion. So New York.
Sure, I'll start with that. I don't think New York really does impact Connecticut. I think my sense is that Massachusetts and Rhode Island do more so than New York.
Okay.
But having said that, we do have very ambitious clean energy goals, and and as I mentioned, for offshore wind goals. Where I think we fall short is on the solar side, particularly with virtual net metering, and there's kind of a reluctance to really be robust in that area.
Yeah, I think one thing that is remarkable about Connecticut did this session is essentially the legislature reversed itself from the past session and extended virtual net metering in a way that sort of was an implicit acknowledgement that they may have moved too fast or moved in a wrong direction.
Yeah, they extended it, but it's really not a whole, I mean, they doubled it.
Yep.
But it's still, when in Connecticut, I'll just very quickly explain virtual net metering. First of all, it's split between 80-20 between Eversource and UI, and there's 3 tranches. There's the state tranche, the municipal tranche, and agricultural tranche, none of which can use more than 40% of the money. So, and the munis basically are really the lead on this.
Mm-hmm.
There just isn't that much to go around. We were advocating for a much more robust program of $50 million or more.
Can folks hear Mike? I'm not. We good over here? Okay, great. New York, other perspectives on the New York legislation?
Yeah, Marty up in Maine here, I will say, first off, our climate council has 39 members.
Duly noted.
No, look, I think these things do make a difference. I don't think it will make a specific difference in Maine, but as a Maine legislator, I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to look at what happened in New York and say these are really aggressive goals. And I do think there is a follow-on effect for legislators for other states, and they're setting the bar pretty high, and there's this chance. I mean, I'd even build this parallel a little bit to in Maine new solar legislation, LD 1711 was, a lot of that was informed by the Massachusetts SMART program. So I do think as a former rep, a lot of times you look at these things and say, well, there were some lessons learned, there were some opportunities grabbed, how can we do that here within our state? So I think these are aggressive actions and will definitely have a trend-setting effect for us.
I'll say, realistically, nothing this ambitious is going to happen in New Hampshire anytime soon. Big concern would be how much would this cost us, and climate science is not a generally accepted fact at our state house still. If climate change is mentioned at a hearing, the hearing becomes a debate about whether or not climate change is real. So we're not quite there yet. I think I learned today that we're the only state without an EV rebate now too. So there certainly is a lot of opportunity to make a lot of progress, yeah, in New Hampshire. But yeah, we're trying to make progress where we can.
But even so, I mean, New Hampshire is seeing a fair amount of legislative activity, and you know, it's bipartisan, and that activity, I think, is a function of the sort of the technology maturing, the market opportunities becoming more evident and more mainstream. And you know, things like EVs, Tesla's a household name, and EVs are not the way of the future. They're here now and on the road, and
yeah, absolutely. One of the bills that I didn't mention is a study commission to look at doing a state clean energy procurement, and so we are hoping that will get through the governor, and that we could at least look at that. And the conversation around that is just completely centered around cost, seeing the results of the Connecticut and the other state procurements, and the prices, the competitive pricing that utility scale solar and offshore wind has been coming in at. That's a much more interesting proposition for New Hampshire than the other approach.
So before I turn it over to the audience, I wanted to invite our panelists to ask a couple questions to each other, and just to start the conversation, and then we'll turn it over to the audience and facilitate a conversation. So anyone on the panel would like to ask another panelist about a different state? Don't all volunteer at once. I got more questions if
Well, actually, while everyone is thinking of their questions, I want to jump in on your last
Please.
point. So I think when states are setting goals or mandates, what's really important is to meeting those commitments and the accountability factor. So Vermont, for example, has had economy-wide goal of 50% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2028, 75% by 2050. That went on the books in 2005. And since then, Vermont's greenhouse gases have increased. So, that's one of the reasons we're looking to try to figure out, we have statewide goals and plans, as others have passed, in Massachusetts has that, and I think other states were looking at Global Warming Solutions Act, what enables the teeth to it, what ensures that implementation and accountability will happen, is something that the entire New England region and other states are struggling with. But I do think that it really helps to drive capital investment, as you all know, to those states. We've seen in Vermont, many of our companies that were doing building solar projects started in Vermont, and they are now working in New York and Massachusetts, sort of exporting the expertise that they fine-tuned in Vermont, but it's really driving. I do think, though, that the mandates around energy storage that New York and Massachusetts have done help drive more competition,
Yep.
rather than the flashy. But now I know everyone's ripe for questions.
So Dan's gonna ask a question if nobody else is.
I was just I wanted to answer Olivia. I think that this is complicated. This is really complicated, and we talk about this in tranches. We talk about the fact that, that greenhouse gas has gone up. Transportation is driving that, from what I understand, in Vermont. And so how do we get to transportation? Well, you need EVs or ZEVs. And if you do that, you need more electricity to power that. And how do you get that? Well, in Massachusetts, we went the ISO had 300 and some odd power plants 20 years ago. Today, there are over 500,000 generators just in the southern part of Massachusetts, because every one of those solar panels is a generator. It hooks into the grid, and in some places it's congested, some places it's not. So how do we handle that? All of these questions are extremely complicated. And the interesting thing about the New York bill was New York has done a tremendous amount of energy. They've moved forward in energy over the past 15 years or so. But this is the first time it's really been legislation. A lot of it's been driven by the regulatory process. So the legislature is bought in, the governor's bought in, and we need that to solve these complicated questions. They come up in every state. There was a hearing the other day on net zero energy in Massachusetts, and one of the representatives got up and he said, hey, I was at home last weekend during the heat wave. We used 22,000 megawatts, 450 were wind, so many were solar. So we're going to need the other 15 or 16,000 megawatts. That's an intriguing question, and it's something that we all have to be pushed to solve, and we all have to solve together. And in Massachusetts, here's my answer. And in Massachusetts, what happened was the governor was taken to court. And the court said, you're not following your Global Warming Solutions Act. You need to do better. How he does better is, we're still all over the place. And the administration has been, points to studies. And we said, where are you going? Well, we get this study that gets done in 2024. We get a study that gets done in 2020. We need to resolve this. And it's not a partisan issue, and it's not one thing, but it's moving all this stuff forward. And that's why it's interesting to be here and listen to all the different initiatives that every state is doing. We all need to adopt this, and we all need to do what New York is doing.
So, Madeline, look like you were about to ask.
I was going to ask Mike a question about that controversial bill where the utilities are allowed to own storage. Was there any limitation put on how they can use the output of that energy storage? Because in New Hampshire, we had two competing energy storage bills, and it was very much the debate of, is storage generation, what should utilities be allowed to own it, what can they do with the power? And so I was curious if, you know, because if you can sell the output into the wholesale market, it sure does look a lot like generation.
Well, you know, I read from the statute here that the bill did not address that. The bill, it sort of left, not sort of, the bill left it open field running. They can own, operate,
Do
start,
what they want.
and that's what, you know, again, that's what brought the generator community, made them off the charts ballistic.
Right.
It's like, wait a second, you're springing this at the last moment. There's like, you know, 4 hours before this bill is gonna be taken up on the floor, we're seeing this for the first time. And it's a major piece of legislation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a major topic that certainly warranted a public hearing and never happened.
Absolutely.
How the sausage gets made sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, with that, let's turn it over to the audience, and I saw Beth had a question, and I saw Ally had a question as well. So Beth, why don't you go ahead
Yeah,
and
so-
speak loudly so we can.
Sure, I'll speak loudly. So I'm Beth Zonas. I work for Clean Tech Open, part of NECEC. My question, first of all, awesome work. Thank you for doing all the great work you all do. It's fantastic. But what I wonder is if there could be some way of looking at this a little bit differently and looking at what are the impacts of all of these bills that have happened in the past, and maybe finding some buy-in. So a few of you, I think Marty and Madeline, it said you're looking for economic connections and you're looking for buy-in that can't have to do with climate change. So what about showing that there are new jobs, or what about showing that you know, that there's some other benefit to the kinds of things that you're doing? Maybe there are fewer incidents of asthma or something. But if there are ways to be able to show the results of your past work, or maybe even taking those examples from other places and saying, well, here's how it worked in New York. They had this aggressive thing, and this is what happened. To be able to show that could actually help to make a case.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. So I think the question is around a little bit around sort of coalition building and look, I think there's some of the procurements in Maine for renewable energy that have recently been closed on are at 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So I mean, I think anybody running a business is going to be looking at those and saying that's a very, very good opportunity. And I think the new procurements for commercial and industrial solar too will hopefully spread that message sort of wider within, you know, across the aisle, so to speak. But it's funny how divisive this stuff is sometimes, and I think it doesn't need to be.
But there are different ways to pay for it. In other words, you're saying that it's a cost issue, but if you say, well, yes, but look at all these jobs that would be created, or look at how, you know, people's lives improved, or they saved money in this other way, then the cost would then be justified.
I do think we need, as a sector, to do a much better job of communicating our successes. So things like installing solar so that peaks are shifted into the evening, installing solar so that, you know, those capacity costs are essentially eliminated. In Vermont, that's our case. Those are tremendous successes that clean energy technologies have created, and we all, rather than going to, okay, what's the next thing? How can we, you know, because we all have this tremendous sense of urgency with the planet on fire, we need to make sure that we're doing that full circle and thinking about how every single one of us in the room can tell what that success story is, because that's what legislators need to hear. You created jobs in my district. You helped lower energy costs. You made it more resilient so people didn't have to worry about their lights going off, and they have, you know, backup power with batteries. They are spending less money on gas. Communications is an area where our sector really needs to improve and tell those successes every single day, and not just particularly for solar, not just you don't pay an electric bill. You know, that's not, you know, at the end of the day, that doesn't create a winning message for the decision makers.
Yeah, I'll say we always lead with the economic development benefits. That's what we try to talk about always the most and first. And we are also starting to see awareness of the consequences of inaction in New Hampshire. We're the only state that ISO New England predicts to have an increasing peak demand, while all other states are doing a lot through energy efficiency and distributed generation to manage theirs. And that means that more of the regional costs are gonna come to us. You know, transmission costs and capacity costs get split up in the ISO New England network according to peak demand. And so we have seen, that has started to resonate with some legislators to understand the consequences of, you know, the states around us being at over 10% solar penetration and us still being less than 1%.
Abigail Roberts from Sirius, just given that the Transportation Climate Initiative is a hot topic for not just obviously Governor Baker, but all of the New England states, just curious about what folks are thinking about the upcoming legislative session. We're certainly seeing some potential bills already claiming what revenue, there is no revenue yet, but how that revenue would be spent, and just thinking about collaborative ways between our states to be supporting one another in that effort and trying to get some of the states who aren't officially in, but who are certainly observers in that process, part of the dialogue.
I'm happy to jump in, but I think you probably want to hear from the panelists first.
I would say TCI is high on the mind of legislators in Vermont. There were several bills introduced, and it was incorporated into our transportation bill to support funding for the state agencies to keep participating. I think there's not political will to do state by state carbon pricing, and this is seen as the solution where it creates political cover, particularly for Republican governors, no offense, but that's what they need to create this. So folks are waiting with bated breath. I'd say there's very high expectations for it to come as a solution, and it's really being received in Vermont as an alternative to a carbon pollution tax as a way to create revenues on the transportation side.
Just to be clear, the Transportation Climate Initiative, TCI, is a regional effort to develop a cap and invest program on transportation emissions. It's sometimes referred to as a shorthand as RGGI for transportation, but the idea is that you would set up a regional program that would then get ratified at each state level, and those revenues generated from the carbon fee would then get reinvested in a variety of ways. And as Ali mentions, that there are a lot of people who are already spending that money and thinking about ways in which it should be reinvested for a variety of transportation, community equity, and business development, market development needs. And so the states are working hard to sort of put together the sort of framework for which that program might exist, but then it has to come back to the states to get ratified in each individual way, and then decisions about how those proceeds get invested get made at the state level, just like they do for RGGI.
I can give a little bit of a Maine electric vehicle update. Maine has a remarkably small number of electric vehicles. I think the number is just in the hundreds. But the proceeds of the Volkswagen settlement are dedicated now to building out DC fast charger infrastructure. So if you're heading to Maine for the weekend, probably the first big area you come to is Kennebunk, and DC fast chargers are actually going in there as we speak. And and then from there, I think the intent is to build out destination charge points as well. And so if you own a business and we'll put one in and allow for it to be shared, it's essentially free for you. So I think I like this initiative also because it does tend to have more across the aisle support as well. And we've got a lot of runway ahead of us in Maine on electric vehicle infrastructure, which I guess is a positive way of saying we don't have much now, but it seems to be changing.
Other questions, folks?
Hi, Katie Rieger with IGS Solar. So thanks again for the great work. I hear all this stuff that happens in the legislature, and then my brain, working on the business side, goes immediately to what a number of you alluded to is, okay, let's actually turn this into regulations so that they can actually be things that we can engage in. So I guess my question is really probably mostly for Connecticut and Maine at this point, because the rubber's gonna meet the road in a lot of the regulatory proceedings there. could you just talk a little bit about, and the other states, if you've got things going on, please talk about it as well, but just some of the dynamics that you guys see coming up, in those regulatory proceedings leading to I guess the dynamics and the timeline, leading to, you know, actual business opportunity.
Go ahead. Sure, I'll start with that. Timeline is July 1st of 2020 when the PURA docket has to be finalized and turned into the Energy and Technology Committee. I think the dynamics in Connecticut, I think, revolve around price. I mean, we're the highest electric rates in the continental United States. The utilities are going to make the argument that all solar does is help some folks at the expense of most folks, and so therefore we need to go down a very careful road. I think it's critical on our side that we talk about the economic benefits, the job creation, the benefits to the environment, and those sorts of things, and we make that case very strong, which is why, you know, I'll say it for the third time now, I think if you're going to do business in Connecticut, you really need to be involved in that document.
I can give a quick main update. I mentioned the sort of a follow-on effect from legislation in other states and the Massachusetts SMART program. Some people might say that program was, or at least maybe the way we heard it, was a little slow to get implemented. So the legislators at work in this session put very strict timelines actually in statute. So no vacations at the main PUC between now and January, because most of the rulemaking is actually required, all of it really taking place by January, the end of January 2020, and the procurements all the, you know, right through basically the next 9 to 12 months. So I know you've been hearing a lot of talking points lately, so one of my talking points is that E2Tech is holding a conference on September 25th, where we will really dive into these things.
And just to reiterate, I think the PUC is motivated, and we're likely to see dockets kick up, you know, in August, you know, before Labor Day.
Absolutely right.
Mr. Nozzle, I want to take your question. So, Chairman Bosley said something really interesting. Well, you said a lot of really interesting things.
Should we stop the presses?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, exactly. But you mentioned ISO New England, and you mentioned how 10 years, or you said 15 years ago, it was managing 50 generators. Now it's got 500,000 in I think you said Southeast Massachusetts. And in considering sort of the continuing policy initiatives at the state level and their impacts, and in quite some cases sort of destiny is going to depend on sort of what happens at not only the regional RTO level, ISO New England, and through everything with needed interconnection and management of the bulk transmission system and how they end up sort of deploying generation. How do you see ISO New England playing in this space, and maybe if the panel, or I know we've got some sort of neat pool veterans in the room, Mr. Fuller, how do you see sort of their role continuing to evolve, and any challenges or opportunities on that end?
Evolution of ISO.
That's a great question.
It's like a whole
I wish I
conversation.
had a great answer. They're trying to figure that out at the same time that we're trying to do this. I mean, every state comes along, and we started this in '97 when we passed the Electric Restructuring Act, and we've been doing things ever since. Every time we pass some legislation that increases solar, increases wind, increases participation in the market, microgrids, all of that, ISO, whose job is just to keep the lights on in New England, they have to fit that in that box of things that they do. And it's not just one state, it's 6 states doing these things. One of the frustrations for me, I think personally, not necessarily NECEC, but for me, is that we can't seem to harmonize legislation on a state-by-state basis. TCI is a great example of what we can do when we put, or RGGI is a great example of what we can do when we put our minds to it. But we're all over the place on things. This year, automobiles, EVs, trucks, that's the sexy issue this year. Every year it's one, and last year it was offshore wind, the year before, storage. So there's always one issue that rises to the fore. We all struggle, we all run out to do legislation, and then ISO struggles to fit that into that box, that construct of keeping the lights on. I would encourage people to sign up and go to the consumer liaison groups that they have. Every quarter, ISO, they're gonna be in Portland, Maine, I think in September 5th, which, by the way, incidentally, is 20 days before the 25th. Where I understand you two, Ted.
Thank you.
There's doing a forum.
September is wonderful in Maine.
But I would encourage you to go to that, because they actually sit down and give reports as to where they are on certain issues. They discuss certain topics, and they discuss how hard it is to put this together. I'll take the interconnection issue just as the main issue right now of things that that we struggle with. They need to work all of that together. And maybe we think they should have been more prescient 20 years ago and figured this out beforehand, but now we're stuck with a system that has dead ends in some place, has congestion in other places, and in other places works fine, and we need to make that work better. I think they're working really hard at that. I think their role will evolve, and that's if the federal government allows them to evolve, because this administration in Washington right now is trying to roll back the clock, is trying to impose trying to impose limitations on what they can do to take care of some other industries in the name of nationwide resilience and protection. So it depends on the administration in Washington, it depends on how quickly they can come together, and quite frankly, it depends on all of us participating in the consumer liaison group and things like that. And then, other than that, Beth's question, I don't know, I just got a text from Senator Mark Pacheco, arguably one of the best friends we have in the legislature, not arguably, one of the best friends we have in the legislature. It just texted me to say we created 104,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts, and we should lead with that. So.
Anybody else want to chime in on ISO? I mean, I think just like we're asking our utilities to evolve with technological innovation, business model innovation, etc., our ISO needs to evolve as well. And I think we as an industry need to start showing up.
Jeremy, could you go back to the New York slide? Picking up the last three comments, look what we're dealing with. You're dealing with a cluster study with National Grid. We were at that interconnection conference, and National Grid was asked, well, once you establish your baseline of this existing cluster study, what are you doing about the ongoing legislation compliance that's going to call for more DG to be installed on the grid? He did not have an answer. What is it going, now there's legislation that's been proposed for like 25% solar by 2030. I think we're dealing with that on a discrete, support kind of a basis. What is it going to take for NECEC to encourage the state, the legislature, the legislators, and the governor's office to adopt this kind of long-term planning? Because it's going to take care of ISO New England. It's going to take care of their planning. It's going to take care of the utilities planning. It's going to take care of the need for DOERs to try to encourage building-mounted and carports and specialized, more closer to load kind of uses, but they don't have a program that lasts long enough to survive the sales cycle to get that done. Caitlin Kelly was at a GTM conference the other day. She was told, now she already knows this, but she was told, in public, that Massachusetts program is too choppy. And your small business people like myself, you go to talk to a commercial user, but the program disappears before you're able to complete the sale. It's impossible.
The regulatory uncertainty is hard, and policy is one piece of getting a project built. And as you well know, it's hard to build a project under the best of circumstances. And having a stop and start program, having the absence of goals, and sort of a long-term planning horizon. I think you're right that is a huge issue around the investment net needed for the grid, for the utilities, for clean energy developers, to have the assurance that there's gonna be a market not just tomorrow, but a year from now, 2 years from now, and that market's gonna be bankable. And I think New York does a little bit of that. I think there's a lot of rules to be written, and there's a lot of sort of work to be done to meet the sort of laudatory promise of this bill.
Right.
But I think you're right, there's value in setting those long-term targets and mandates that signals to the utilities that you should be expecting not only this, this amount of saturation, this amount of applications, but it's not gonna slow down, and we need to continue to invest and to allow the utility to plan and hold them accountable for planning further down the road.
So is there a particular focus that NECEC can do to advance that concept more vocally than they are in individual support of individual pieces of legislation?
I think there are a number of pieces that are out there, and I think I think it's a question we need to sort of wrestle with in terms of setting up a big picture vision for what the region needs. And I know Peter wants to chime in over here, and I think I'm going to let him. So.
Yeah, a couple things on that front. First, today's been a recapping of legislation. We have not covered rate cases. We have not covered a lot of the regulatory proceedings that we and a lot of you are involved in, including grid modernization related cases that we've been part of in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and other states, and certainly in New York with REV. So there's multiple forms for dealing with these issues, and I think they're very much in play. I want to add two quick things in terms of this question about this model from New York and setting this level of targets and impact, what this means or impacts on other states. I think it's going to have a significant impact in Massachusetts. I don't think necessarily with the administration leading on that, but so I represent NECEC on Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act Implementation Advisory Committee. It's a mouthful. But that group meets every couple months and looks at all the structures that are needed to advance aggressive goals and meet what is today 80 by 50 goals for Massachusetts. But the majority of that committee is pushing that the studies that are underway right now look at net zero by 2050 as an additional scenario, with the expectation that that's going to be part of the debate and part of what over the next year. And I think there is an opportunity to weigh in on that side of it. I think the question on the other aspect of interconnection and grid modernization and all that, I think the big question there is, do the utilities start to find a way to plan and get ahead of where, how they manage the grid and how they give transparency and visibility so that everyone doing projects, energy efficiency, storage, solar, et cetera, buildings, microgrids, understands the grid interconnection profile of that region and is able to plan for the places where it has the most value? Or do the utilities, are the utilities going to be a real partner to that? Or are they going to be a laggard, and in effect there's going to be other companies who are doing energy as a service who will provide that and offer the ability to plug projects into a virtual power plant constellation and in some portion of the grid? Because frankly that exists as well. And we know we have companies some of our members who are doing energy as a service who are thinking that way. So there's some battles there's both legislation to work on, but there's also business model and business partnering battles to be a part of in the coming year or two.
Let's see.
So, it's a quick question, it sort of follows up on what Peter was just talking about, but it seems to me that there's a significant portion of load in New England that's served by public power, municipal light plants. And we're not going to achieve our 80 by 50 goals or 100 by keeping them out. And I'm curious as to whether any states are proposing legislation or what they're doing to bring municipal light plants, into being part of the solution, to opening them up to project siting. I develop a lot of commercial solar rooftop deals and love to be able to do work inside of municipal light plants. It's about 15% of the load in Massachusetts. But SMART doesn't touch them at all, and I can't do anything there. And I was on the board of the Reading Municipal Light Department for a while too, so I sort of see both sides, but it'd be great to bring them into the fold and not just ignore it. And I'm wondering, again, if any state is doing anything or what the NECEC's position is.
Yeah, well,
aspect
I'm
of that.
gonna turn it over to the panel first and hear from them on municipal light plants who may not be completely into the fold on clean energy programs in your states.
Yeah, it sounds like good legislation to me. In Vermont, we have 14 municipal or public power supply utilities, and they are not exempt from any requirements or programs. Oftentimes they get a little more time to comply, or they have a different process for compliance, but the main requirements they're not exempt from. So in every state, they should not be exempt, or we won't meet the commitments and be able to serve people with the clean energy that they need.
In New Hampshire, we only have a handful of municipal utilities. Almost the whole state is covered by our 3 regulated utilities, but we do have the New Hampshire Electric Co-op that's not regulated, and in many, many ways, the co-op has been the most progressive area when it comes to clean energy and clean tech in New Hampshire. So we're actually seeing that they do it on their own in several cases.
Anybody else?
I'll just almost echo that in Connecticut. It's a very small piece of the market. I think there's 6 municipal electric companies, and they are doing their own thing, but they're not big enough, I don't think, for the state to really get involved and make a major impact.
It's a valid and long-standing issue in Massachusetts, as you well know, and bringing them into the fold makes a lot of sense, and it's harmful for programs like SMART, where there's 50% of the load or 50% of the sort of market that's not available, and I think it is something that we need to continue to wrestle with. We're almost at time. I want to offer up one more question before we close this morning. Anybody have one more burning question before we adjourn?
What has been the influence of lobbying with a lot of these policies? I think that's somewhere where our industry lags, and more lobbying dollars going towards a lot of these policies. We have great organizations that help with it, but have you seen any wins with pro-solar lobbying in any of these legislations?
As a registered lobbyist, I will tell you. I think it's important to lobby. Here's what happens with our industry. And I think Marty and I both, as former legislators, will tell you that lobbyists come up and they present the case for who they lobby for. They're neither good nor bad, they just present the case that they're hired to present. And in our case, it seems like every 2 years we do a big bill in Massachusetts, and every 2 years everyone goes out and hires a lobbyist for about a month, and the lobbyists go up and they try to meet with everybody, and sometimes it's a very confusing message, because the message isn't always, the message can be discordant, not everybody's saying the same thing. And as legislators, we know that if you can't make up your mind as to what you need, how do you expect us to do? And that's the way legislators feel. And so we need to have a more harmonized message. We need to have more consistent lobbying. And so when those lobbyists go away, the issue gets, put in the back of the 300 issues that a legislator has to deal with that week. So you need to have a consistent message. It works. The only thing I ever learned about lobbying was in French 1. Écoutez, répétez, répétez, répétez. Just keep repeating the same message, simple message, Clean energy's good. And at some point you're going to walk by that person, they're going to say, hey, clean energy's good. And that's what you need to do. Keep the message simple, but keep it consistent and keep it going, because you're competing for legislators' time, you're competing for legislators' attention, and you need to you need to educate them to an issue that we all know very well. You all know very well. I've been in this since '97, and I don't pretend to know the business as well as you do, but you all know very well. We tend to speak in shorthand sometimes, and people don't understand that. And so we need to educate legislators, and that's a slow, gradual slope of education.
And it makes a tremendous difference when people show up, and don't just show up during session, but actually show up in your districts, invite legislators to come to your office to meet all your employees. That's what makes the difference. And have people come as they are. It's different in different places, but particularly, young workforce, many of our employees are in the trades. You don't have to get dressed up in your best Sunday suit to come, you know, because it's more come as you are in your authentic self and have your employees do that. That's made a tremendous difference in Vermont, where I just said, you know what, just come at the end of your day to the reception in, you know, in your work clothes. All right, people cleaned up a little, but then it helps to see these are real jobs and these are real people that affects you, and do it outside of the legislative session as well. Like, we all need to be lobbying now for legislation to pass in January. Now is the time. January is kind of too late.
I think the bottom line is lobbying is essential, but it's not the only thing. You need to back it up with a story, with facts, with a vision, and with consistency to build those relationships and earn that trust. With that,
Jeremy, before you go, could I just, we're probably going to do this, but I just want to say, I just want to give a shout out to Patrick Watson, who's our policy intern, who's sitting over there. He's leaving at the end of this week, Williams College student, and he's been a great intern for us.
Indeed.
And then I also mentioned Jamie Dickerson earlier, but I would like to say
Jamie who?
Jamie Dickerson. Jamie. It's just we all know that he was wicked smart, and we all know that he worked very hard. But he was an individual of exquisite character and integrity. He was our good friend, and we're going to miss him. So I just wanted to give him a shout.
He's still alive, by the way.
He's dead to me.
He's still in the industry.
No, Jamie was a tremendous asset to NECEC, and we wish him all the best going to work for Alicia Barton and the folks in NYSERDA. They, as we've seen, have a lot of work to do, and a lot of that is going to fall to NYSERDA and probably cross Jamie's desk. But I want to thank our panelists too, who really traveled far and wide to be here this morning and really do the work day in and day out, and really have made a difference across the region. So please join me in giving them a round of applause. I want to thank all of you for coming this morning, and a particular thanks to the folks at Roundup for hosting and being such great partners. And thank you to Sean and Brennan and Kate and Antonina and Pat for making it happen this morning. It was a great event. And continue on the theme of events. There are a couple things coming up for NECEC that I want to make you all aware of. We have our summer member mixer on August 21st at NECEC's office is in the back bay. The weather's nice, we're going to be outside. It's an informal opportunity to catch up with folks and have a little social time at the end of the summer before September gears up and it's off to the races. Our Signature Green Tie Gala is coming up on October 17th. Get your tickets, get your tuxedos out of storage, get those green dresses ready to go. It is a very fun night, and we're very excited for that. And then finally, Horizon 19 is a follow-on conference to Horizon 18 last year, where it's an international gathering of climate solutions, business opportunities, and it is September 18th through 20th here in Boston. There will be a follow-on event the next week in New York for New York's Clean Energy Week. Very big opportunity to sort of expand the scope of our day-to-day and sort of get international opportunities. So with that, thank you all for coming, and please stay engaged. Thank you.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, I was just, if you look at, no, I
Why is that not?
Awesome, yeah, I'll keep down the list. But right now, I feel like I remember you telling me you were going to, and I would love to go see it.
But I want to like find a place that's like a touchdown for like the today, but also like a couple of hours of free time. And I'm like, I need like one of those drives. I forgot to a woman who is a member of one of our affiliates, which is a Corporate Rail Health Association, helped fill that form. So we're like hearing about it. She says it's really
Sorry.
I'm actually gonna. Sorry. Brendan stopped recording.
This meeting is no longer being recorded. You have been disconnected from the meeting.
Utilities are worried about that. I don't feel like